I do a lot of slamming of orchestras on this show, but I actually went into a concert hall late last week and took in a concert. I
Oh my.
actually I actually did it. We talk a lot about how programming is what keeps a lot of people out of the concert hall, but from your perspective, is it squarely programming or are there other variables like scheduling, how long these concerts are, days of the week? Does that apply to your non engagement of those spaces?
A lot of things. I work Thursday, Friday, and Saturday nights, so
And that's when concerts are.
if I have one of those off, there's a lot of competition, so it's gotta be yeah, programming is what it comes down to, and money.
Yeah, yeah, and, there's a lot of, interesting programming things happening around the Twin Cities, especially with the Schubert Club. Since 1882, Schubert Club has been cultivating a passion for music and fosters an engaged community of music enthusiasts through concerts, music education, museum exhibits, and student scholarships. For more on Schubert Club, visit schubert.org. I'll speak a little bit more to the diversity of programming that Schubert Club engages, but I wonder if you'll say more to what you're saying. We tend to think a lot about things like, okay, how long is the concert? When is the concert? But it sounds like if it was the right type of programming, you would bend yourself in a way or find room in your schedule, find the money to actually engage some music you want to hear performed orchestrally.
I think so. Yeah, something new and different. We talk a lot about, we've said many times, "Hey, orchestras, how about dumping the lesser known piece on your program and put on something by a living composer or
Yeah.
something like that?" That's
Hmm.
what I'm trying to see. And, I think it was when we had the second interview with Katie and Delaney from Classically
Yeah.
Black,
Shout out to them.
and they pointed out something that has stuck with me, which is why get dressed up a certain way and go and fight parking and all that
Yep.
to hear something how you know how it goes?
That's right. That's right.
Or once you hear the catchy part of a symphony or an overture or whatever, and then you gotta sit through the rest of it that you don't really care about.
Right. Right.
That's all I'm saying is, give me something new, give me something exciting that I haven't heard.
Hmm.
How about that?
So the concert I went to at the Minnesota Orchestra, it was hosted by Louise Toppin. Shout out to Louise Toppin,
Yay, Louise
a member of
Toppin.
the TRILLOQUY family. It was conducted by Kensho Watanabe, who I know listens to TRILLOQUY. So shout out to Maestro Watanabe once again. What I was finding myself thinking about as I was listening to this concert was that living composers, that really is the focus that we need to hone in on
I think
moving
so.
forward because this was a whole concert program of black composers. There was Margaret Bonds on the program, Florence Price. There was some Adolphus Hale story. He's living. I
Right.
really appreciated that piece. Some Samuel Coleridge Taylor. But what I found my ears gravitating to most was a work that they performed by Hale Smith. It's a work called Contours, and I want to share just a little bit of the conclusion of it here, just to give you a sample of this vibe. So I'm always, the cool guy in the concert hall. When the piece ends, I just, I'm kind of just sitting there and tanking it in, and maybe folks are clapping or whatever. But at the conclusion of that work, it wasn't really highlighted in that recording. But when the Minnesota Orchestra performed that work, the bass drum player really put a period at the end of that sentence, and that last boom just,
Mhm.
inspired instant applause out of me. Again, like I was saying, we had all of these black composers featured on this concert, but this was the aesthetic that really had me thinking. I wasn't daydreaming. I wasn't thinking about other things. I just found myself laser focused in on the performance. We talk a lot about that contemporary aesthetic, and maybe my being a band person and the first years of my learning to play in ensembles,
Mhm.
having been with contemporary composers and music that sounds a little different than the what the Suzuki string players are playing when they're 4 and 5 years old. Anyway, I wonder, what some of your continued thoughts are on diversity of aesthetic within diversity of of composers, a program of William Grant Still and Florence Price and Chevalier de Saint Georges. If I'm just going to pull out those three, that is a program of black composers. It's also a program of an aesthetic that we're used to. What do you think about shifting to a more contemporary aesthetic, in addition to exploring more works by people of color and women?
So what you're saying is that, the program that you just described is we're having a lot of sameness in the aesthetic there, or that it's black composers working in the Western aesthetic? Is that what you're saying?
I think we have gotten to the point of doing a great job of highlighting exactly what you're saying, black composers who work in that
Uh-huh,
traditional
uh-huh,
Western aesthetic.
uh-huh.
But I think we need to move beyond that, but further than that. And yes, shout out to all of the living composers who work in a more contemporary aesthetic that are not black. I think what I think about a lot is that there are so-called historical black composers, older black composers who are still living, who have been working in that more contemporary aesthetic for a long time and have been doubly marginalized, not only because they're black, but
Because
because
they're
the
working
the sound of it isn't pretty or whatever people want
or
to
what
hear
they're
when they
used
turn on
to.
the public radio station. How do you engage normalizing a more contemporary aesthetic in your presentations or in the work you're trying to do?
Wow.
At least for audiences. Let's say for audiences, you happen to have something on one of your playlists that people would describe as crunchy. That's one of those words people
Yeah.
use. How do you sell it to the listener? What does that break sound like from you?
Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. It's a great question, and it's something that I wrestle with every time I open the microphone on something like that. And I've
Mhm.
talked about it before, how you have to build it up, you have to promote it, especially if you're working in an environment that I am, where people are used to a certain thing
Yeah.
from you. And the minute that you give them something else, some hackles are going to be raised. That's just the
Yeah.
way that it is. And what I have found I need to do is, even if I get backlash from some of the crunchier pieces, or that I'm playing something by a black composer that isn't recognizable or something like that,
Mhm.
I have to stand my ground.
Yeah.
If I hear backlash about it, and I engage that person through email, or well, it's usually through email, but if I engage them, I have to stand my ground
Mhm.
and say, "Well, this is what we're doing now."
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but and I also frequently bring up the point that, look, in front of this piece of music and right after it was exactly what you're used to.
Mhm.
So, any other radio and TV station that somebody takes issue with what is aired, they turn it off for a minute
Yeah.
and then go watch something else or listen to something else and then come back. I don't know of anybody who burns down an entire radio station because they play 5 minutes of something they don't like.
Sure, sure. I remember I was so frustrated by this conversation in the early days of the radio leg of my career. Shout out to Todd Steed.
Yeah.
After one program, after one shift, he called me in to his office to basically say, "Look, I get what you're doing. The audience needs to be the water needs to be warmed up gradually. You can't just throw them into a boiling pot of water, so to
Mhm.
speak."
Mhm.
And a part of me was really frustrated by that conversation because when I think about public radio generally, I think about a vehicle of exploration and where people can learn and discover. And I felt a responsibility to institute that in my programming, that learning and discovery. So it's not that I went all the way back and started playing Brandenburg concertos, but it took me a while and a lot of self sacrifice to determine for myself how do I incorporate some of
Mhm.
those more contemporary sounds into what I'm doing now. It was still a vast majority in my programming, vast majority 20th century and 21st century.
Mhm.
And there is a lot of contemporary music that aesthetically is easier on the ears for folks who are more used to that traditional sound. But what I continue to find to be a challenge is how to have the conversation without stamping certain types of music as different or weird or crunchy as we're using. I used to use the analogy of life isn't always pretty, and that means music isn't always pretty either. But even so, I don't like the idea of just I don't know, stamping the idea of this piece of contemporary music that has that contemporary aesthetic, stamping it weird or different or anything like that. I just want it to be considered among the aesthetics of music, you know?
Do you think that just providing more of the correct context can alleviate some of this?
Say more of the correct context.
Meaning that, like, let's say if you're working on one of your shows, Sound of 13 or something like
Mhm.
that, and if you spend some time to really frame a piece of music or the state that a composer was in or what they were trying to convey, will that alleviate some of it? Some of the hesitancy?
It may, it may. I'm thinking about, the composer George Walker, for example. You
Mm,
know, we
mhm,
love to,
mhm,
play his lyric for strings and talk about the fact that he, was a black man who won the Pulitzer in
mhm.
music. The piece that he won the Pulitzer for, if I'm not mistaken, is one of those pieces that, again, we would call crunchy or something like that. I'm thinking about, Raven Chacon, who won the Pulitzer this year for, the piece of music, I think it was called Masses for the Voiceless. Apologies if that's not the title of it, but that piece of music has some of those, you know, contemporary aesthetics that aren't necessarily singable or relaxing or you know
Mhm.
those words people approximate to it. Uh, I just think we have to figure out a way how to celebrate those sounds without continuing to marginalize those aesthetics as weird or different or crunchy or those sorts of things, especially considering, again, the reason we're talking about this, that is the music that I found most engaging on
Right.
this Minnesota Orchestra concert. So there are folks who, you know, daydream or drift off when we're listening to a
Of
Beethoven symphony or a
course.
Schubert song, but something that we have to actually listen to and sort of digest, that is the stuff, and that's
Right,
what I want to
right.
go hear every time I go to a concert hall. Listen, I love an adagio for strings at the right time, you know, I love one of those beautiful Schubert songs or Verdi arias at the right time. Even, you know, Mozart songs I think are very beautiful, you know, the vocal stuff he wrote, and I love, you know, a little bit of a challenge, you know, not every day is a I'm trying to make a food connection. Not every day is a piece of cake or a bowl of ice cream, you know. Sometimes you're eating something spicy or sometimes you know you're having the sour the gyoza, is that
Mm,
what they call it? Sometimes you're
the
doing that, you
umami.
know. Some and we need to treat music that way. You know, acknowledge and celebrate the spectrum as much as we can so that the things that we think are a little different or a little left field just become a part of that spectrum of music, especially when we're talking about classical music. I think it's important to for all of us in our various presentations to figure out how to do that. So, shout out to Minnesota Orchestra for an incredible concert last week that included the Hale Smith. I'll have a link to that recording that we just listened to a little bit in the description. Shout out to all of the radio hosts like you, Scott, who are, you know, convincing audiences that, oh my gosh, this is a great piece of music or whatever. You know, see, that's your talk about my Buddhism. You know, that's expedient means. That's
Mm.
you saying what you think you need to say to get them onto it. You know, so as we, you know, consider more of that spectrum, I think our job here on Triloquy is to expand that spectrum even further so that things that weren't always considered classical are considered classical and a part of that spectrum of musics to be celebrated alongside Beethoven and all of those folks. Or maybe we should just, you know, get rid of them, like I tend to say, but
That's what you say.
but at the very least, you know, at the compromise I think can be to just acknowledge more of the spectrum and celebrate it all as equally viable and equally important in this genre of music that we call classical music. That's what we're here to explore anyway. Let's jump in. I'm Garrett McQueen,
I'm Scott Blankenship.
and this is TRILLOQUY, Opus 169. Thank you so much for everyone continuing to come back and listen to this show. We really appreciate your support week after week. We couldn't do it without you. To new listeners, if this is your first time checking out the TRILLOQUY podcast, TRILLOQUY is a show that takes the phrase classical music and challenges the traditions surrounding it. We take conversations, we take compositions, and everything in between and approximate it to that phrase in a larger effort to decolonize the phrase classical music so that our American perspectives, our contemporary perspectives, fit into the conversation of classical music. For more information about the TRILLOQUY podcast, to check out past opuses, to learn a little bit about the folks who helped make this possible, and to contribute to the TRILLOQUY podcast, visit our website, TRILLOQUY.org. In addition to your very generous support for the TRILLOQUY podcast comes from Schubert Club. They have some incredible things coming up here in autumn. You know, the leaves are starting to turn. It seems like, you know, you talk about you're getting over a cold. The
Mhm.
the way that the weather just flipped the switch here in Minnesota
Yep.
overnight. You know, we were in the 70s and 80s one day, and then the next day I'm getting a jacket out because it's 40 something
That's
degrees, you
right.
know, and I'm trying to be Minnesota hardy, talking about, oh, 40 degrees, oh, that's not really cold. But I went outside one good time and I said, all right, let me go ahead and grab my jacket. Yeah,
There is a difference between 40 degrees after having 75 and 80 degrees
absolutely.
and having 40 degrees after it being 20 below.
That's what I'm saying. So, yeah, because right, because 40 degrees in the fall in Minnesota, you're bundling up. 40
Mhm.
degrees in March or April, it's time to go swimming,
You'll
you
be
know?
out in Crocs.
Anyway, Schubert Club has some incredible stuff coming up this fall season, including Our Song, Our Story, the new generation of Black voices. It's an evening celebrating the world's most well-known arias, art songs, and spirituals, created and directed by composer, conductor, and multi-genre musician Damian Sneed. Shout out to Damian Sneed, a homie of mine.
Hey,
That's
Damien.
coming out on November 18th with the Schubert Club. And then a little later on next month, Schubert Club is presenting Kids Jam, Journey Through Afro-Brazilian Music with Ticket to Brazil. Listen to and learn about the exciting and energetic music of Brazil. Create your own percussion instrument and play along with cello, guitar, flute, and more percussion. That's coming up on November 29th. You can learn more about what the Schubert Club has going on again at schubert.org. Scott and I have some really great music coming up in the second movement today. Shelley Washington is the third movement guest. I'll talk a little bit more about her in a bit, but for right now, we will jump into movement one. I also want to acknowledge before we jump in, last week's opus of Triloquy came out on Yom Kippur, so I hope everyone Jewish had an easy fast
Mm.
last week. I will say the office at the American Composers Orchestra were closed, so I didn't have to be in front of my emails so much on Wednesday. And I have to say, the 3 day the 3 day weekend is one thing. I think there need to be more midweek bank holidays, and
Is that right?
I think in New York, they acknowledge, in the workplaces, a lot of the Jewish holidays, so you have a lot of Wednesdays off and Thursdays off, but there was
Mm.
just something so replenishing about working Tuesday, Wednesday, "Okay, I can breathe on, Wednesday," and then Thursday, Friday, I jump back in. I wanna do more of that, but
Mm.
personally. So, the 3-day weekend is one thing, midweek breaks. Let's do that. So, anyway, I
I'm
hope it
willing to try it out, but I like to have them. I like to have days off stacked together.
have them together. Yeah. So anyway, I hope all of the Jewish listeners had an easy fast on Yom Kippur, and then I also do want to acknowledge that we are taping this on Indigenous Peoples Day.
That's right.
That'll come up in the second movement, and I have a couple things to say in the Triloquy movement about that. But anyway, getting into this week's accidentals, I'm going to get us going with a sharp. I'm reading here from the website 411 Mania. This is a an article that speaks to a television program that's going out right now called "The Dark Side of the Ring." Actually, what's it called? Oh, it's called "Tales from the Territories." And so basically, it's a TV show about the history of wrestling and wrestling matches. It's hosted by The Rock, you know, Dwayne The Rock Johnson, you know,
Yep.
one of those, you know, where's my hold on, let me get myself together. Dwayne The Rock Johnson. because, he
Mhm.
been fined for years.
Okay.
But, you basically have a roundtable discussion on this show with a number of wrestlers, including Jerry the King Lawler, who, if you're from Memphis, a celebrity,
I know
whether
Jerry
whether you
Lawler.
like him or not, ran for mayor a few times. See, we weren't having that. In Memphis, we elect politicians to to political seats where I moved here from. But what's the wrestler's name? Kane. I don't know if you remember the wrestler Kane. He
Vaguely.
he's the mayor down in Knoxville, so they got a wrestler for a mayor. But anyway, this show, Tales from the Territories, was on TV, and they were talking about Memphis wrestling, and I didn't realize how big wrestling was in Memphis relatively.
Mm,
So growing up, I went to wrestling matches all the time. My great grandmother, may she rest in peace, she loved wrestling well
mhm.
into her 80s. She was sitting in front of the TV getting excited about it. Were you a wrestling fan at any point?
When I Yeah, I remember in the '80s, Sunday afternoons were all about wrestling. But see, this was back in the day before the makeup and the costumes and all the choreography that you have now.
Mhm.
Guys came out in singlets,
I mean,
just as they
that's a
were,
costume as far as I'm concerned.
just as they were, and they come out and they were actually doing some real wrestling moves.
Mhm.
I want to give a shout out to an Omaha resident. At least he was born in Montreal, but he died in Omaha. His name was Joseph Maurice Vachon,
Mhm.
or as I knew him, Mad Dog Vachon.
Sure.
And he was just one of those crazy, he acted insane on the
Uh-huh.
camera. He was growling and barking and everything, had his beard cut to look like he had two little teeth coming
Yeah.
up there.
Yeah.
But when I'd see him jogging in the streets, he'd just go, "Hey boys, is you?"
Mhm.
He was just this sweet guy.
So he wasn't completely kayfabed. He did
No,
leave the character in the
yeah,
ring every
yeah,
now and again.
yeah.
Well, anyway, so I'm watching this show. They're talking about Memphis wrestling. I'm getting into it, getting all nostalgic, and they start talking about how from week to week they would do different events in different cities and become regulars in more cities than just Memphis.
Right,
Another
right.
one of those
Touring.
cities was Louisville, Kentucky. So they're starting to talk about Louisville, and all of a sudden they're talking about the Louisville Symphony and the relationship that they had with that. So let me read from this article here. So it said so there again. There's a round table of wrestlers here, and one of them is Dutch. It says here Dutch says that he had an opposite experience than going and performing in prisons when he performed alongside the Louisville Symphony. The idea was the orchestra was going to provide a soundtrack to what was happening in the ring. The
That's
ring was in a pit, like the orchestra pit, and raised up like the ring from Rocky Four. I'm reading here. And he says, "This is awesome." The match was between Dutch and Jeff, and the fans were doctors and lawyers who had no clue what they were watching. But by the midway point, they started getting into it. "This is just fantastic and awesome in ways I can't explain." Dutch, ever the heel, broke a drum over someone's head, and Jeff ends up getting the win with a sunset flip. And while watching the show, they're showing clips of this wrestling match with the orchestra when one of the wrestlers was pinned, and the percussion is improvising. One of the wrestlers was pinned, and all of the percussion section they find something to bang on for the 1 2 3, shoulder down thing. It was just incredible. I couldn't believe what I was watching on TV. It comes on Vice. Shout out to Vice. So I want to learn more about this time in history. Based on the footage, it looked like it was late 80s or early 90s. So I'm just scouring the internet, and I cannot find this footage. I cannot find a video from this wrestling match. It must be archived somewhere. And it just makes me think about the many, many things where orchestral music has touched the rest of the world that we don't think about or that we don't know just because there wasn't Instagram back then. There aren't quote tweets for us to go look up. I cringe thinking about how many orchestral, just regular people events took place that we'll never know about. What do you think about wrestling meeting the concert hall, me and orchestra performance? I'm going
I'm
if that
intrigued.
happens.
I'm intrigued, but question,
Yeah.
do you know of any professional wrestlers that are also musicians?
Huh. There are, shoot, and I'm sorry that I'm not thinking of their names, but there are some trombone player wrestlers, and actually a part of their gimmick these days is to go out onto the not the court, the ring,
Uh-huh.
and, like, play a trombone melody before they start wrestling. I'm sure the
Okay.
trombone has been broken over someone's head. Pete
So,
Pete put me onto them. Shout out to Pete Collin.
so my question is, if you can get something like that going where you have a wrestler who also plays an instrument, can you imagine the band improvising as the wrestling match is going on, and then they tag out with the musician, and then the musician gets into the ring, and the one who was wrestling now has to improvise the music after they've tagged out.
All sorts of possibilities. The trombone player's name is Xavier Woods. Let's listen to a little bit of their presentation here.
Trombone. We got something to say. We are your new tag champs. New day, new day. That's pretty good.
Couple little trombone notes in there. The
Mm.
wrestling is getting interesting.
I, all right, I think that I might pony up the money to see
To go see
go
Xavier
see,
Woods play this trombone.
and then watch him wrestle.
And the quality of the sound is pretty good too. You can tell there's some good air going into that trombone.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, would you pony up that money, or not? I know you would pony up the money. Do you think people, wrestling fans, would just say, you know what, fine, let's go to the symphony if it's going to be some wrestlers there? Is that a is that a viable, non sort of tokenizing way for orchestras to get folks who had never been there before into the orchestra hall if they set up a ring and let people beat the shit out of each
I'm
other?
gonna, I'm gonna be honest. I'm gonna be honest, and I'm gonna say that that is really reaching.
You said
I
that's
mean,
reaching.
they are really trying. They're really grasping at new ways if they're going that
I would
route.
have that attitude, and I would be there. I would be like, "Okay, Minnesota Orchestra is pulling out all the stops. Let's go."
Mm, mm.
There was a
But
oh, go ahead.
at the same time, I mean, if you could really make a critique on what you think about the viola, you could go over and just grab it and bash it over somebody's head,
Yeah,
or you could dunk somebody into a kettle drum,
but
or
but see, what would have to be a part of the show is the conductor getting involved.
oh,
The
okay.
the conductor needs to be stone cold stunning, or whatever the fancy wrestling move is
Mm, mm,
these days. I mean, the former president was stone cold stunning, so
mm,
he got involved with wrestling. So
yeah.
so why not the orchestra industry? Anyway, in connection with this, I found a classic FM article. In the midst of my looking for the then Louisville Symphony footage of wrestling. I couldn't find it, but I did find a classical FM article that says classical music and wrestling, 10 wrestlers who use classical entrance music. We got the Hallelujah Chorus as entrance music for Damien Sando. We got Pomp and Circumstance for Macho Man Randy Savage. Do you remember Pomp and Circumstance being a part of?
Yes, I
Oh, do
do.
you? Okay, not the graduation part, or was it the?
Yep, you
Ba-da-da-da?
bet.
That's
And
what he
he ca-
came
and he
down.
came and he came out with his arms out like he was just being worshipped on all sides.
Wow. Also, uh, Gorgeous George used Pomp and
Yeah,
Circumstance. Do you
yeah.
know Gorgeous George?
Not as well as the others, no, but I know of him. Yes.
They say Triple H used Beethoven's Ninth. I remember Triple H's heyday. That's when I was going to Monday Night Raw and doing
Mm,
all that in Memphis. I don't remember that. Daniel Bryan with Ride of the Valkyries, Jerry the King Lawler with the Great Gate of Kiev. I guess that's Mussorgsky, right, from
right.
Pictures at an Exhibition. So a lot of crossovers. Just wanted to bring that in. It was something that I had fun thinking about and engaging on TV. Again, if I'm sitting in front of the TV and I'm not expecting to, for them to talk about orchestras or nothing like that, and to see that was exciting for me. I was like, okay, wow, this is a thing that's happening. But the whole time the wrestlers are sitting around the table talking about, what did they call this? Symphony of Doom, I think was the name. Symphony of Destruction was the name of the event. They keep talking about, oh, and I'm sure we had all those highbrow people just shook and X, Y, and Z. So
Yeah.
it's also important to just remember the general idea that a lot of people, as I say, the uninitiated, have about those spaces. You have these wrestlers who are world famous now, who in 2022 or whenever they film that special are thinking about orchestral audiences in that way. So we have a lot to do, a lot of work to do still to normalize the idea of regular old people in those spaces and not upper crust sort of fancy people as they continue to think about it today.
I would love to see the reaction from folks like Norman LeBrecq. I would love to get his review of a wrestling symphony combo.
No, because if they know he's in the audience, somebody's gonna pull him in the ring or something.
And the conductor will get him from the top of the turnbuckle.
Yeah. Well,
Boom, down he goes.
well, among the people named in this 10 wrestlers who use classical entrance music, number 2 was Ric Flair with also Sprach Zarathustra. I actually do remember that, shout out
Yeah.
to Ric Flair, but Ric Flair came into pop culture a few years back, I think 2017 or 2018, when Offset and Metro Boomin and 21 Savage came up with a little tune called Ric Flair Drip. Your cultural competency has extended far enough for you to understand drip. So, for the public radio folks listening right now, what do we mean by drip? What am I talking about?
All of your effects, your clothes, your accoutrement, your
Mhm.
whole manner as you present is your drip.
Mhm.
Let me put it in Liberace
Right.
had some drip.
Oh yeah, he was definitely dripping. When I went down to Memphis for a wedding, my one of my cousins, I was like, "Oh, I see you. I see this blazer you got on." He said, "Well, I got to leave a little something for y'all to mop up." So anyway, so drip. That's what we're talking about.
I have to give a shout out to a listener. Her name is Rain. She writes in every once in a while, and I I was talking about Maurice Ravel going to a tailor before he went on a yacht
Mhm.
ride. I said, yeah, he went down. He had to get some drip for the trip, and she wrote, and she was like, I never thought I'd hear that.
but shout out to Scott Blankenship. Getting the people together with some contemporary culture on classical radio.
Mhm.
Anyway, let's listen to a little bit of this tune, Ric Flair Drip. Wrestling meeting hip hop culture. And the song goes, it has a nice little ostinati in there if we want to use our classical language. Ric Flair Drip. 21 Savage, Offset, and Metro Boomin.
Metro Boomin, want some more, nigga. Going to the jeweler, bust the AP, yeah. Sliding on the water like a jet ski, yeah. I'm tryna fuck you on your bestie, yeah. Chopper with the skull, so do not test me, yeah. Ric Flair drip, go woo on a bitch. 5790, spent the coupe on my wrist. Multi-million-dollar, I'm a fool with the hits. Hop up in the lemon, drop the roof, show the tits. Poppin', but you really not gon' shoot. 90 pointers, time my diamond look like hula hoops. Hoppin', moppin', take her in the seats of my suits. Balenciaga, check my purse with Valentino boots. It's the booming out of way, a lot of them, a lot of race. Never hesitate to give a nigga yellow tape. And worry about the bag, cause the cash accumulate. Soon as we came in the game, all these niggas, they...
And they had Ric Flair in the video.
I love how he's just
and Ric Flair's having the time
fit
of his life.
right in.
I mean, because he got the drip.
He
And that's,
does.
see, think about that. We have a white man, a middle-aged white man who set out the culture of just being brightly adorned and just
Ostentatious.
having all of this music, all of these costumes and jewelry, and that inspiring a culture that is completely aside from it, and the coming together of those cultures through music. What if classical music could do anything
What
like
if?
that?
What
Because Ric
if?
Flair don't have nothing to do with hip hop, but here he is in a hip hop video having the time of his life,
Mm.
And I bet you there was even more fun that happened when the cameras went off,
Oh, I'm
if you
sure.
if you're familiar with hip hop culture.
Sure.
So anyway, that is so exciting. I love it. And Offset even I think performed Ric Flair drip at a wrestling match, on a Ric Flair celebration day or something like that.
Mm.
Anyway, cultures coming together through music, classical music meeting wrestling. There's so many opportunities out here for the field. And I hope that before I lay down for the last time, I can say that I went to a concert where I saw
Jeez.
somebody get stone cold stunted or suplexed or whatever. That would be a show that I would be at.
Off the turnbuckle right into the string section.
But see, we got to get orchestral musicians to get the stick out of they ass at the same time, and
Mm.
be open to something like that. Maybe we figure out a way to do some sort of choreography where the wrestler does crash into the woodwind section. No one no one instrument is heard, or maybe you bring in your B instrument or something. That is the extent to which we have to go to really engage new audiences in a new way. My upstairs neighbors, maybe he don't want to go hear Beethoven, but if I tell him, listen, it's going to be some wrestling and some music. You want to go? I think I could get him to say yes. So, to all of the artistic planners out there, consider some wrestling next time.
And it certainly sounds like all those kids are wrestling upstairs already. So,
All right. Well, what accidental you got for us this week?
um, I've got to. I'm going to give it a flat here.
Oh, okay.
Um, actually,
We'll give the sentiment in the article a
the,
flat, but
right.
we gonna give Chi-Chi a sharp, a couple of sharps. Anyway,
Yeah,
what are we talking about?
yeah, this is another one of those instances where I'm uncertain as to what direction to go with it. But there's one thing I am sure of is that this is definitely a contender for one of the longest headlines that I've ever read. I'm reading from the dailymail.co.uk. Fury after woke orchestra, which has received more than £1 million of public money, refused to play the national anthem after the Queen died because it symbolizes the racist British Empire, despite its director and founder previously receiving a CBE.
Can we talk about the word woke for a second? That has so quickly been turned into a conservative pejorative.
Yeah.
I don't. If someone calls me woke, I'm not going to take that as a pejorative. But whenever you see it used, it's used in a way that says, "Okay, here comes the woke crowd doing
hmm
this or doing that," and that's what's happening here in this article. Correct?
hmm So they're pointing out that this orchestra, Chiniki Orchestra, has received $1 million worth of public money. They have been, I think the CBE is a recognition that's just short of a knighthood, but it does recognize contributions artistically
Right.
to the country. Chiniki Orchestra performed at the Swiss Festival, the Lucerne Festival, during the morning period.
Yeah.
I think it was 10 days, right?
Mourning period of Queen Elizabeth.
Queen Elizabeth's
Yeah.
death. You're not supposed to exercise, play sports, do anything festive or anything, and people will beat your ass because that happened in like the morning line. There was somebody that was protesting and they got the hell beat out of them. The founder
And they call indigenous people savages.
Right.
Anyway, go on.
Founder and artistic director Chichi Nwanuku banned "God Save the King." Now, that was a huge gesture.
Yeah. Absolutely.
In that moment. And in the article, let me see if I can find it here. In an email, Ms. Nwanku wrote, "The Chiniki Orchestra is full of musicians who are not from the UK, and many who are the direct result of the ancestors being enslaved. We will not be playing the national anthem in Lucerne." I think that was a very bold and courageous move. We talk a lot about the differences between the racial issues between the United States and in England.
Mm-hmm.
And I just think that was just an incredibly bold step for them.
Yeah.
She points out that she was trying to be sympathetic to the people in her orchestra.
Right.
Because when Philip died, they had a moment of silence before they played, and that there were people in the band that were going, "We don't even want to do that."
Yeah.
So I think that it was just incredible. I think that she showed real leadership in caring for her musicians in that moment, and also just provided a real model, for people around the world.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking about, you mentioned Katie and Delaney from Classically Black a little earlier. I'm thinking about Delaney. She tickles me so much. One time she told me, they talk about here in the United States, stand for the anthem. She said, "You're lucky I don't lay down, but
Yeah.
I'm gonna stay seated,
Yeah.
So I think it's so easy for people to jump to, oh, you're being disrespectful and da da da. But we have to consider the perspective of Black folks, people of color, especially indigenous
Mhm.
people.
Mhm.
Again, this is on the American side of things. We have to consider that perspective when we think about the idea of patriotism or one pledging allegiance to a flag and to a country that it represents when you think about the history of things. So that's on the American side. On the British side of things, when we talk about the concept of colonialism, I mean, who else but England? I mean,
Mhm.
we can talk about the way that the Spanish language took over Central and South America and that sort of colonization and, those sorts of things. But, England is the last person to be talking
Right.
about respect and that sort of thing in light of people who are the result of that colonialism,
In another email in regard to God Save the King, Chi said, "I would be extremely uncomfortable imposing it on people who A, are not British, and B, who are not nationalistic, and C, the list goes on. It
Mhm.
does not mean that we are not sad that the Queen died."
Yeah.
Um, One insider said Chi was adamant that the anthem represents a British Empire which was a racist institution and which was responsible for the persecution of many of the ancestors of the players in that orchestra. Shout out, Chi.
And this podcast is called Triloquy. Imma keep it real. Shout out to Chi Chi. I would not have expected this. This was a surprise for me to read, not because I don't think, Chi Chi and Chiniki are, down with the cause and trying to make change, but because of what's laid out here in this article. The arts and government, that relationship is very different outside of the United States. You have a lot of these orchestras across Europe that are state funded, musicians who are state employees, so it seems like something like this would be something that,
Hmm.
an ensemble like Chiniki just couldn't do. But here I am being proved wrong. So, I live.
Now,
I live. Shout
you
out to
uh,
Chi Chi.
you always talk about how the story is really in the comments, and
Okay, here we go.
now this one has 1.3 thousand comments.
Have you looked at any of them?
I don't have to because I know what's in there. And my question to you would be, what would you say to the people who say, well, then Chiniki should give back that 1 million pounds? That they should survive without that money that the government gave them.
What?
Do you think Chiniki should give it back?
No, and as a matter of fact, they need to give them more.
That's what I was hoping.
The money, the little bit of money that y'all have given Chiniki, they really need more because y'all have marginalized over there in Robert is it Robert Albert Hall or Albert Royal
The
Hall?
Royal Albert Hall.
Who are we talking about last week with RE? I'm forgetting. South Bank Center, the South Bank.
Mhm,
All of these
mhm,
concert halls have spent a century or more marginalizing and pretending that works by women and by black composers and by other composers of color, just pretending that they don't exist. Beethoven and Mozart and Haydn and all these folks, that is the only music that exists. So you spend that much time ignoring these composers, ignoring those aesthetics, and ignoring the musicians who want to promote that music. No, you owe them more than £1 million. So not only do they need to not give it back, y'all need to pony up some more. I get so tired, Scott, of just this idea that the past has to be forgotten and that we have to be fully patriotic, and we're disrespecting a country where we get X, Y, and Z. And
mhm.
we'll talk a little bit more about it in the Triloquy. But before we cut on the mics, I talked to you about that meme I saw where folks are like, well, if we never came over to this part of the world, y'all would still be worshiping the sun. Well, the sun is real. The sun actually
It
exists,
exists.
and it's like there is just, this idea that anything that does not fit into that white supremacist structure is savage or
Mhm.
less than, or you should be so grateful to be here, or you should be so grateful X, Y, and Z. Shout out to Chi Chi. I hope that we see more and more and more of this. God Saved the King is not the same tune as Rule Britannia,
Mhm.
but I think about Rule Britannia where the actual lyrics are Britons never, never, never will be slaves. Okay, so you're saying those other black and brown people will enslave them, but for us, we
Mhm.
will never be slaves. So you want people of color to have pride in that, and you want orchestras, especially predominantly people of color orchestras, to play this racist colonial music. Chi Chi got it 100% right. Chi Chi is going to be okay, and Chi Chi is going to have way more support from people who weren't thinking about orchestras or people of color orchestras, I think the support for Chi Chi is gonna explode,
I hope so,
and in
man.
a good way.
Yeah.
There's one thing I wanted to pull from the article here. It says the move to snub the national anthem was first revealed on the slipped disc classical music website. Its owner, Norman Lebrecht, our friend Norman Lebrecht, said it's terribly disappointing that a young British orchestra representing the country during a week of state mourning was unable to perform the national anthem as a mark of respect to the late Queen. That's damaging, not to Britain, but to Chiniki. We need to, and in the same way that we are working to define success and excellence in a different way than we have, I think we need to do the same for words like damaging, because it is not damaging Chiniki's record to have done this. Maybe in the eyes of a white supremacist, but not in my eyes. If
Mhm.
anything, like I was just saying, this gives them street cred. This gives them points. It's not damaging at all. I mean, surely you don't think this has damaged Chiniki or Chiniki's brand or what Chiniki can do in the future.
Maybe in some of those bigger venues, I doubt that she's going to see a huge deficit in listenership or attendance because of this.
No, because when I see her in Detroit for Sphinx at the end of January, I'm gonna give her a giant hug. I'm gonna
Mm,
be like, Chi Chi, what can I do for you?
yeah, yeah.
Let me serve you. How can we help? So anyway,
It might seem like such a small thing to us, but I mean it was a huge show of leadership, I think,
yeah.
for Chi Chi to do that. That is not a milieu that it is easy to stand up in that way,
Hmm.
and she did it. And by all accounts, Chiniki Orchestra gave a hell of a show there in Lucerne.
Yep.
So hats off.
Yeah. Whew, goodness gracious. It excites me. This is what pushing the needle looks like.
Hmm.
Here over here in our young little baby country, it's orchestras that are still performing the national anthem, the American national anthem to begin the season. And there are, audience members, I'm sure, or board members, funders who would think that it would be inappropriate or blasphemous to not do that. For Chiniki, for Chi Chi to stand up against an age-old empire,
Yeah, yeah.
that is movement, that is activism, and I take off my hat to Chi Chi Nwanoku. Thank you for the work you're doing over there. You are on the front lines in many ways. Like I've often said, I don't know how I would engage the conversation of decolonizing classical music over at the, colonizer home base,
Right.
but Chi Chi is doing that work, and I celebrated. We all celebrated here over at Triloquy.
From inside the mothership. Thank you. Thank you, Chi Chi.
Well, there are a lot of interviews and talk media from Chi Chi on the internet, but I found an excerpt from a program called Shooting Star from 1994, where Chi Chi is performing the Suite Gavotte by composer Hans Fryba, Fryba. So we're going to listen to Chi Chi play this bass a little bit to get us into the second movement. Shout out to Chi Chi Nwanoku. You out here doing the work. Thank you. There are probably still a lot of people who have never heard the bass played like that.
Oh, I'm
We
sure.
think of the cello as one of those solo instruments, but a lot of folks have yet to think about the bass in that way. And we
Hmm.
have the bass concertos, the Bottesini and I'm forgetting I think there's an even more famous one that folks play. But I live. I cannot celebrate Chi Chi enough in this moment. That is incredible. And then on top of that, it's not like, last week when we were talking about Tox Dada and he was arguing that he's not an outsider. Don't treat me like an outsider. I'm
Hmm.
thinking about that here when it comes to Chi Chi. She is someone who plays the bass at a world class level. So it's not like she's just throwing rocks from the sidelines.
Right.
She has gone through the system. She went to those royal schools and created these orchestras and did everything that she could. And within that skill set is fighting against and pushing against colonialism and white supremacy and this white centricity of classical music. I'm celebrating her. Goodness gracious, so incredible to have this story. All of that will be linked in the description, but we are now here in the second movement where Scott and I are going to take the second ending and talk a little bit about some music we've been spending some time with. Kick us off, Scott. What you got?
Since it is Indigenous Peoples Day, I wanted to highlight the work of a pianist that I've been listening to for about a year now.
Hmm.
And he's based down in Phoenix. He is a Navajo pianist named Connor Chi. And I had an interview with him where one of the things that I really wanted to get his opinions on is the way indigenous music can be interpreted through our more Western instruments,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Because one of the things that he talked about was that his father was a powwow singer, and he was trying to archive some of his performances and record them, and how when they were working to archive things, say for example, his father would start singing a song in A sharp,
Hmm.
and then he would go to like some sort of a powwow or a dance competition, and then his father would start singing in F,
Yeah.
the same thing, but it was all about feeling. And he said, keys don't necessarily work
Right.
in indigenous music, and the rhythms are also different. The way that a drum circle works doesn't necessarily line up with the way that we would count in a song in the Western style,
And why
right?
would it?
Right. But there's a piece of music that I wanted to bring in that actually the whole album is pretty incredible, but Navajo Vocable is the release, and what can I say other than Connor just has a way of conjuring those indigenous images
Hmm.
using the piano in a way that I haven't heard before. And there's something about number one that kicks off this album that I thought also really fits with the changing season right now. That it works with the way the leaves fall, with the way the wind blows through. That I can just feel the history that he's trying to archive and keep alive in his music.
There's something so haunting about that for me. Me and Dell went to the Midtown Global Market. For folks who live in the Twin Cities, y'all know the Midtown Global Market, just a place where you get all sorts of um, I hesitate to say world culture or world food
Yeah,
because we've talked about that, but where what is central is what people bring to the space from their own respective culture. So, for example, when I need a new dashiki or something African to wear to a fancy event, a ball or a gala or something, or I go over to the Midtown Market. So, when we would need some ground lamb or food that isn't necessarily at Target or Kroger, that's where we
sure.
go. So anyway, me and Dill, after leaving the Buddhist Center yesterday, we went to the Midtown Global Market and there was actually a indigenous food demonstration by the sous chef from Awamni, which again was named the nation's best restaurant not
Yes.
too long ago. A decolonized menu. Go check out Awamni's website if you don't know that restaurant. Anyway, we saw the food demonstration, and then they had a drum circle demonstration, and just throughout all of it, I get this deep feeling of sadness, maybe that's the word I should use, but just sadness or sorrow over what isn't just plain in front of our faces anymore that should be. The real true culture of this part of the world that has just been erased, and we have to wait until Indigenous Peoples Day to see it centered or to learn something more about it. There's just something just so sorrowful and ghostly about that, and I hear that, I'm reminded of that as I listen to this music.
Ghostly is good. I mean, I'm not necessarily attaching it to scary or
Yeah.
sad, but there's a reverence there it's shouting out
Yeah.
that history. And sure, a melancholy can be part of it.
That's a good word, yeah.
A spirituality. There's a spirit
Mhm.
in Connor's music that he conjures that I just don't find in many places.
Connor Chi, go check out the Navajo Piano. I'll have a link to that in the description. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. Again, we'll get more into it in the Triloquy, but we need to start thinking about what repatriation actually looks like. Anyway, we'll revisit that in a little bit. But the music that I'm bringing in today is a tune that comes from the Wind Tree Studios. So, how I got to this, I had a heavy Buddhist weekend, and one of the groups that I chant with and study with, Buddhists of African descent, we had our little virtual retreat, and one of the exercises was to listen to and even chant with, if the spirit so moved you, this African drumming song called Ancestors Forever, Mababu Milele. And again, it comes from Wind Tree Studios. I clicked on it just to see, what we will be dealing with for our little retreat, but I ended up returning to the piece of music over and over again. So here's a little bit of it from the beginning. Ancestors Forever, Mabamu Bilele.
Mababumelele, ancestors forever. Mababumelele, ancestors forever.
So I'm sure you can imagine, if I'm listening to this and I'm getting into my nam yo ho renge kyo, nam yo ho renge kyo, I can really, feel like I'm connecting with the ancestors and
Hmm.
having a spiritual moment.
Hmm.
Eventually, in this recording, there is some melodic percussion that comes in, some xylophone type instruments, and it just adds to the beauty and the magic of this aesthetic, this classical aesthetic. So before we turned on the microphones and we were listening to a little bit of that in preparation for this opus, you sort of asked the question. You were brushing up against it with the Connor Chi piece that you brought in, but this idea of a Western way of thinking about rhythm fitting on top of age old, eons old rhythmic traditions, and
Mhm.
how we can think about that. How is this in 4/4, or how should we?
Right.
What were you wondering about in exploring that question?
Well, for example, in indigenous drumming,
Hmm.
you might not even be able to find the one. It might
Hmm.
be in 5 or 7, or part of it in 4 and the rest of it in 11. I don't even know how to really ask the question. I
Yeah.
mean, it's just it doesn't fit neat and tidily into the Western way that we think about rhythm, doesn't it?
Right. And it shouldn't, because that is what decolonized or uncolonized music, I'll say, that's
Mm,
what that is. Again, thinking back to that indigenous drum circle that I saw at the Midtown Global Market yesterday, singers would come in and out. There would be times where the drum is, struck much harder than before,
right.
and I could tell that from their perspective, it was very systematized, and it, made a lot of sense. But I couldn't key in into, all right, are we in bars, or,
There.
but that was a part of the beauty of it. I'm thinking about the music. I'm not thinking about the structures and traditions and mathematic equations that go with this. I'm thinking about the actual event that I have the privilege of bearing witness to. So, that's sort of how I engage that conversation. Not everything has to fit into that Western classical way of understanding, and we need to become more comfortable with that as
That's a good point.
as we expand our definitions of classical music, and act on, what that how that manifests in performance spaces. Anyway, I'll have that linked in the description. Mamabu Milele Ancestors Forever, from Wind Tree Studios. Really incredible, incredible piece of music. Is going to be in my regular rotation now, even sometimes as I sit in front of the Gohunzan and chant. Just so glad to have come on this piece of music. All right, well, we're getting into the third movement. This week's guest is Shelley Washington. I was so happy and honored to sit down and talk with Shelley. She is from Kansas City, Missouri, but hails from New York City these days, I believe Brooklyn. And she has a premiere coming up with the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra, a West Coast premiere of a work of hers called Both. I want to read a little bit of the program notes here. She says, "Both is inspired by the many dualities I have and carry in my life, the ones I see and the ones I hope to someday achieve. As someone who often lives between both coasts, is attracted to both men and women, is a contributor in both classical music and do-it-yourself post-rock, is both black and white, experiences both extreme mental highs and extreme mental lows, is both a composer and performer, is both a student and a teacher, is both, is both, is both." So that idea of living in two spaces inspired this piece of music. So it's going to be performed, I believe, October 15th by the Los Angeles Chamber Orchestra. We talk a little bit about the piece Both. We talk about life as a composer, a musician, and a human being. I was so glad to be able to engage Shelley in a conversation, and so honored to present a bit of our conversation to each and every one of you today. To transition us into the conversation, I want to share a piece of music by Shelley Washington called Say. It's a piece of music for string quartet that utilizes vocals and other things, and a great example of what Shelley Washington brings to the so-called classical music ecosystem. So here's a little bit of the opening of Say, as performed by the ensemble Shelley. I'll also shout out the audio engineer Will Stackpole, who is an ACO artist. So anyway, here's a little bit of Say, and here's my conversation with the one and only Shelley Washington.
Say it high, say it low, sing it fast, sing it slow. Say it high, say it low, sing it fast, sing it slow. Say it high, say it low, sing it fast, slow. Sing it low. Say it high, sing it fast, sing it slow. Who are you? Who am I? Who are you? Who am I? Should we get? Should we get? We should get to decide. We don't get to decide. We don't get to decide. Who are you? Who am I? We don't get to decide. We don't get to decide. We don't get to decide. Say it high, say it low, sing it fast, sing it slow. Who are you? Who am I? We don't get to decide. Say it high, say it low, sing it fast, sing it low. Who are you? Who am I? We don't get to decide. We don't get to decide. We don't get to decide. Say it high, say it low. Say it high, say it low. Say it low.
Racial, sexual, bipolar. I have apparently bicoastal now, but it's like those are just a couple of things. I also play in like a post rock emo-ish band, and I'm a classically trained musician, and I listen to a ton of rap. And that, just saying that, there's someone who can be like, "Oh my God, how dare you?" I'm like, "Nope, I'm allowed to like what I like
Yep.
and still be taken seriously." You can't shit on other people's things that they like. It's just mean, and I hate that. But I just wanted the piece to say, hey, it's okay to embrace all of the parts of yourself. And you know, even if you think it's a bad thing, or like if you think it's a flaw, however that was born, it's still part of yourself. And I really love psychology, sociology. It's just a special interest of mine. I love, you know, reading new research, or you know, just like digging down in different rabbit holes, and also, you know, introspection and empathy, working on myself, working with a therapist. And it's been a long process of self-discovery for me, and coming to terms with, oh, that thing in my past is actually trauma. It was really bad, and it affected so many different aspects of my life. And I acted in certain ways that my conscious brain is thinking, oh, this is bad, you're a bad person. But it's not actually that. It's my subconscious shadow self coming out to, you know, do bad, horrible things. However, it's still a part of who I am.
Yeah.
And acknowledging and befriending that aspect of myself, it's hard, it's really difficult and it's scary, but also I'm really happy. And it's a nice feeling, you know, to embrace and like love yourself and put it back.
You have me thinking about the idea of Shelley the human being and Shelley Washington, the name that people read on a concert program and connect to this piece of music. What's that like for you? I mean, that has to be such an emotional concept or idea of many people's first interaction with you or who you are as a person being their perception of what they hear based on what an orchestra is playing, how you were feeling that day when you were writing something. It seems so multi-layered.
It is horrifying, honestly. And like there are times where I'll be talking to my roommate, I'm like, I want to write music and be left alone. Like, and I know that's not how it works at all. I want to write music and I want to share it with people. But I do think about this a lot, because I have not been a like big hat composer my entire life. I actually like have only really been doing it for maybe the last like 8-ish years. You know, it's a pretty immediate like separation of my life, where I lived in Kansas City. I played the saxophone. I had finished a master's of education, and then I'm like, I want to do that, which I know nothing about, and I'm gonna hope for the best. And I moved to New York, and suddenly all of this is happening, and there's still so much I don't know. But I think there's a part in my mind that has always just thought, oh, well, I started by writing, you know, with smaller chamber groups where we could hang out and these people are my friends and we see each other from time to time. But as I'm working, you know, with getting to work with these larger ensembles and these amazing soloists who are playing all over the world, I don't get the opportunity to have that kind of connection with them. And it always makes me a little sad, because I want that. But I also know, I'm like, it isn't possible it's not humanly possible to do that and have that kind of relationship with every single person you meet. So it's kind of been coming to terms with the fact that I only get to have a relationship with someone and it's just like the tiniest slice of someone's life or someone's relationship. Because I've met some amazing people that we had wonderful times working together, or like audience members where we got to have like relatively long conversations and like actually discuss stuff. And I will most likely never see them again.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes me sad, but sometimes I'm like, I wonder what that one very specific person is doing, and I hope they're having a good day. But
Yeah.
I'm probably never gonna get used to it. And I get like when someone's like, "Oh my gosh, I've heard your music," I'm like, "Ah!" Like my gut reaction is like, oh God, I'm so sorry." And I'm like, well, no, I shouldn't be sorry because I want that, and I know that not everyone has to like my music. I'm fine with that. Like that's what makes room for everybody. It's personal taste. And I'm like, cool, that's totally fine. But for the people who do like either see themselves a little bit or they just enjoy it, and they approach me and they tell me that, I do not know why my first reaction is just like abject horror, and it isn't that. I'm just like a little bashful, or I don't know, but it's scary conceptually, I guess. I feel sometimes like my name is not a concept, but bigger than the person I am. And it's like the classical music realm is so much smaller than sometimes we think it is. I'm like, no, we're still the dorks in the corner. Still okay, which is cool. I'm like, I know I am a huge dork, and I love that. I love it so much. It doesn't apply to every single person, obviously, but like classical music is niche. It's really small.
Yep.
So it's all
I definitely understand what you're saying about your name being this. I think about it as a brand. Like when people come up to me and say, "Oh, you're Garrett. I listened to TRILLOQUY and X Y." I'm like, okay, that's great. But my inner thought is, I wonder what they think of who I am as a person, because the brand Garrett McQueen isn't the human being. It sounds like you're sort of speaking to that.
Yeah, and it's I don't think I'll ever come to terms with that. And I mean, it really just means I have to hold the relationships I do have harder. They're they're really important to me. And also, you know, whatever experiences I'm getting to have with people I meet, hold those as tight as I can as well, even if it's only for a moment. But the brand versus person thing, I don't like it, but I can't change. I can't really do it.
What's it like working? What's it like working with orchestras as a composer? It's one thing to talk about, you know, fans of your music, but these are people who have to execute your music. Are you shy about, I don't know, telling the trumpet to play it a little softer, or telling the violin, "Oh, that's not quite right"? How do you traverse that?
I fall back on my training as a educator, and like, you know, I can, if I take, what is it, the GRE in science, I can go teach science, which is great. But my specialization was obviously in music, and I'm like, people learn the same way their entire life. Like you can teach yourself to learn differently, but like the way that your brain's gonna default to doesn't change, you know. And I mean, these are people that are professionals. They've been doing this their entire life, and I'm certain that they've had like really mean people be like, "You can't play it that way," like, "My notes, my music." I'm like, "Hey, you're gonna interpret it the way you interpret it," and I want that in my music. But yeah, there are different times where I'm like, maybe scale that one back just like a teensy bit. But for orchestra, this piece is the first orchestra piece I've written, like, not in school. So like I have a piece that I wrote for the NYU orchestra, but we had, you know, more time together to do that. But this piece, it's like I didn't really get a chance to workshop with the full ensemble. So my first time getting to hear the whole thing was with the Aspen orchestra, which was thrilling. and also terrifying because I'm like, is this going to be the same in real life outside of my brain and the confines of MIDI? And there were things that I ended up changing. I'm like, oh, this actually didn't work. And I was so thankful for the percussionists who came up to me and they're like, the drums that you asked for are too big sound wise. Are you comfortable with switching them out? And I was like, yes, of course. You are the masters of your trade. You are going to know way more, obviously, than I do. And I trust your judgment way more than I trust my judgment on those kinds of things. So I
Right.
was really grateful to them for that. But then, you know, there's some things that, like techniques that not everyone is going to be as comfortable with. So there's talking in this piece where I give them a direction. I just called it chatter as the effect. And I say like whisper, murmur, inside voice, or exclaim. So that's like the, you know, the volume and timbre levels they're working with. And I give them a little prompt, like talk about an animal that you saw that you wanted to pet, like surface level, like grocery stores, weather, but then more emotional things, like what's your favorite childhood memory? You know, conversations with friends or something like that. And sometimes they are talking to themselves by themselves on stage, which if that's not part of your performance practice is horrifying and feels really awkward. And I was like, I straight up told them, I'm like, no one can see you. No one can see who it is doing it on stage. If that is any comfort, because that spotlight syndrome of like, oh God, everyone's looking at me. I'm like, no one's outside is that good. You don't know who it is. But, you know, working with them and getting up on the podium and explaining it was scary for me because I know it's something that's new to some people. So it was partially figuring out how can I encourage them and give them some assurance that it's like it's gonna work, it's gonna be okay. You're gonna feel silly doing it. No one can see you if that's any comfort. However, from out there, it's super cool. I get biased because I wrote it, but it was cool. Like I was really happy with how it worked. So it's, I guess it just depends. You can judge the energy of a room. I'm like, if someone's looking at me really grouchy, I'll like wait until later to be like, maybe have a little chit chat afterwards. I'm like, I am not talking to you right now. You are upset already, and I might have made a mistake in your part, for which I am sorry. So, yeah.
But surely you meet the folks who just dive all the way in, like the things that some people consider silly when it comes to performing new music. You know, I tend to be the one to make the hissing sounds the loudest or whatever the composer wants to do. Like I'm totally taking it on. Hopefully you have that experience with musicians as well.
Yes, it was great. You know, I remember I think it was the first chair and like second chair of the second violins were basically leading the entire orchestra. And once they like they were already more confident about it, but as I was like, yeah, you guys sound great, then they like upped the ante. But then everyone was like, I want that. I want it. I'm like, you're all doing a good job, but these guys specifically. But it made me really happy because some of them, like one of the instructions was like, it's an exclamation, so it's going to be loud. I'm like, pretend you're on the phone listening to someone else telling you a funny story. So we are just getting the reactions, and I give them examples like, oh my God, or like, that's crazy. So you would just hear one voice like screeching out over everyone else. And I was really happy when I just had, you know, I just giggled when I could hear it, because it's different every performance, but I like that. And
yeah. Well, you know, good luck in Los Angeles, and hopefully they dive in as well. I wanted to back up away from the piece both specifically and talk more about just your life as a composer, specifically when it comes to organizations built to support composers. The first time I read about you and learned a little bit about who you are, it was actually a feature produced by the American Composers Forum. We have organizations like that. We have New Music USA, American Composers Orchestra, all of these organizations. How impactful has that wing of the arts been for you? There are a lot of people who say, well, what do these organizations do? How do you answer that question for yourself?
I'll say the support I've received from New Music USA, like some of the organizations I've been able to work with have been more recent in my fairly brief career.
Hmm.
However, I mean, the support that I've received from them has enabled me to do stuff like this, which is like the kind of wildest dreams. Like I get to fly to LA and hear a piece I wrote for orchestra and like get all dressed up. My parents are coming. Like I get to do this. And I know I'm so excited. I get to, like take them on tour. I can't wait. But it's open. That support has opened doors for me that I might have found later, but they pointed me in the direction to now. And I'm very lucky that that's happened in my life. I'm very grateful for that. And I know it's like there are only so many grants that you can apply for.
Yep.
And as someone who has judged stuff like that, it's heartbreaking not being able to support everyone. And
Yeah.
I hate having to choose, but it's necessary. And it isn't so much of a like someone is better than the other person, but it's like maybe who needs this the most right now.
Right.
But like that kind of thing. So I understand that they're not going to be able to help every single person every single time. They will. And I firmly believe that. And it's like as you know, a classical music community, whatever that means, grows, as we're able to, you know, invite more people in, everyone gets lifted up at the same time. It's like the rising tide lifts all boats.
Right.
That kind of concept. So I'm like, you know, it is only going to start with like whatever their means are, and like these really huge organizations relatively to, you know, classical music,
Yeah.
but like these pillars of institution who do have more money and more resources and like the ability to make connections, to financially assist you, to, you know, put you in places like this where it's like, hey, you're gonna write for one orchestra, but then you get to work with like six, like the best BOGO ever.
Yeah.
I love it. I might have been able to do that for myself later, but right now they've invited me to do something I've always wanted to and have given me the support to do it, and that includes like, you know, personal organizing. Even like I have zero executive function as someone with ADHD, and I know someone listening to this went, yeah. It's, but not everyone thinks and organizes and prioritizes things in the same way. So like I struggle with time and timing things and scheduling things, and I have loved getting to work with like Lego. So when I go out and I'm working with LA Chamber Orchestra, and they're, you know, like, oh, do you want to go teach at this school? Oh, do you want to go do this? I'm like, if it appears on a calendar, I will do anything.
Yep.
They made a little Google calendar and they just populate it. I'm like, the 5 days or however long I'm here, you guys get me for those whole 5 days. And if I have to do anything else, they're going to work around those little green dots. And if they show up, I'm there. And it's a really small thing. It has been hugely impactful on my like mental capacity to go and do the work and mentally present and not be super stressed about how long does it take for me to get from here to here, and then how long am I going to be there. Like that is valuable. So I mean, it's really big things, but really small things too.
Yep. Yep. I wonder if you'll speak a little bit more to being a human, not just a composer, but a human with ADHD. You've mentioned that a
Uh,
couple times. My partner, my boyfriend has ADHD, so we engage in those conversations a lot. Yep, gang, gang, all of that.
yeah, yeah,
Why is it an important thing to consider when we're talking about creating music and the relationships that are built throughout that process and all of those things?
yeah. I mean, it's something that obviously has been really stigmatized
Hmm.
forever. They're like, oh, ADHD just means like, ooh, sparkly, and oh, you're lazy. I'm like, I am completely time blind. Like, and it is not just that I'm ignoring the clock. It's that I do not process time in a linear way. It's very nebulous. So like, I don't have the like time clock for how long you've been on this call right now. We could have been here for 10 minutes. It can also be 45 minutes. I don't know. I have no concepts. So if I am like really in the groove, I can easily work for 12 hours. Like I'll get up and go to the bathroom. If I don't look at the clock, I'm like, yeah, now I'll like, go get dinner. I'm like, it is 3 a.m. and I just don't realize that. So in some ways, I'm like, I will harness this power of chaos and use it to my benefit. But then there's also things where it's like I am late to a lot of things because I don't consider. I know I have to go from A and then arrive at B at this time, but then the time in between, it's like that's a huge mystery. I don't know. So, and that and executive dysfunction, figuring out I have 5 things to do: put groceries away, sign this incredibly important life-changing document, walk the dog. You think the documents first. I'm like, I'm gonna walk the dog first.
Hmm.
I understand that there are priorities, but that part of my brain does not and doesn't care because they don't exist. And it isn't like a willful ignoring of that. It's that our little wires, our synapses are just, we built different. And
Yeah.
so, one, realizing all of these things and giving myself grace and unlearning the thought of them being like, oh, it's a flaw. Oh, you're just lazy. Oh, you're such a space cadet. Oh, it's like all of these other negative connotations. Like, it's not, that is not true at all. Like I honestly thought I was really stupid for a long time because I didn't know my multiplication tables. I still don't. I'm not a stupid person. I have different learning abilities. I learn and process things in different ways. And I have a calculator. So I'm like, why would I need that? I'm clearly not a stupid person. I use the tools that are at my advantage and I'm able to do other stuff really, really well. But like unlearning those things is really hard, especially when it is internalized from such a young age. And neurodivergency in general is really not often discussed in a positive, honest light. So there's
Yeah.
some TV shows that are trying to tackle what is someone who is autistic, or working with someone who just different learning abilities, stuff like that, and the totally glamorized TV version that sometimes I hope that these Hollywood interpretations that there's a person in the room being like, no, that's a no, but
Hmm.
that doesn't happen all the time. So someone who has never worked closely with someone who's neurodivergent, by and large, unless they are doing research on their own, they just don't know, and it makes it easier for those people who don't know to like look at their watches and be like, oh my God, this person is late again. They are irresponsible and just broad summary bad.
Hmm.
I'm like, I am not bad. I have I process and I learn and I participate differently. They're not wrong, but I do have a lot of cards stacked against me in a world that's not built for neurodivergency. And accepting that is very difficult. But I mean, a lot of people in the creative communities also have that experience.
Oh
So
yeah.
I'm always grateful working with people that understand that and are willing to work with me in a way to help me be successful, which also just means letting me, I just want to write music, but I need help with that when it comes to like working with these big organizations, and there's lots of like other stuff to do and writing the music. And like with the other stuff, they all have the same priority level. So my creativity and signing a paper carry the same weight, but the thing you want me to do is the creative part. So I need help with the other thing. So when people are like, yeah, you know, we're going to help you with what you need. If you've asked for something, they're like, oh, cool, we understand that. And don't make a big deal about it. They're just like, cool, yes. That is huge comfort. I feel safe. And that kind of safety lets me write music, but also I don't have to feel like I need to mask and be like, you know, lizard person, Shelley. Like I can just be the unmasked version of myself, and that lets me write the music that's the most authentic.
Yeah. And it's really encouraging to me that conversations about disability, different abilities, neurodivergency, how it's becoming more normalized within our, musical spaces. We've started to talk about and, started to engage, race-based equity or gender-based equity, but we have to spread that to everything else as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
It-
How can
and
how can folks, I'll go ahead.
oh no, I'm just saying it's like the the practice of empathy and introspection. It's like, okay, if I don't know anything about this, then I need to go learn. Then if I do have this, I possess like, whatever this is in my life, do I have the energy to, be teaching people about all of this? And am I giving myself the grace I
Hmm.
deserve? So it's like I am a whole person with a rich inner world that is not worse than someone else's because it's different. That kind of thing. But for organizations that are wanting to get into that, you need people in the room
Hmm.
always. Like you need to build the table and not bring people in as a look at us, look what we did. You're sitting here. It's not just a like are you bringing someone in to sit at the table and let them eat with you, or like are they the meal kind of thing?
Mm.
And like that kind of mentality is something that I am aware of because I don't know. If I'm being invited somewhere to talk, I don't know if I'm just a box being checked. And I, as someone marginalized in a bunch of different areas, am always immediately suspicious. That sucks, but it's self-defense mechanism. I have to look out for myself because I'm right there, so I better be keeping an eye on that stuff. But like, it's something I'm very conscientious of. So that like goes back to the like advocacy and stuff like that. So
Right.
I'm like, if an organization were actually I did get to do that. I got to work with a young composers program for quite some time. And I moved on and like graduated from that program, but they asked me to come back to talk to the other teachers about working with students with students with disabilities or neurodivergencies or like gifted students, and like how can you be an effective educator
Hmm.
working with like large groups of people? How do you meet one person eye to eye and those kinds of strategies? So like I made a little worksheet. I'm like, here is essentially 4 years of study and like 2 hour blitz, like let's go. But I'm like, you have to ask someone. You have to realize that you need help and then ask for someone and then ask for someone who's not going to be like, you are bad because you don't know this book. Like, I want to actually help you be an effective educator, but also so in your life, it's like, oh, hey, this actually applies to not just little kids. You don't grow out of ADHD. Well, it's like some people apparently do. I clearly did not grow out of having ADHD. So it's like, it's not just a thing for little kids. Grown-ups have it too. And we just don't always know that. Or we just think, wow, that person is really lazy. No, that's not how that works. So it does happen. And it made me really happy that I was invited to come back and do this and like, use that whole other degree of education, like all of that stuff. But for larger institutions who are, trying to reform themselves into an actual like level playing field, they have to do the actual work, which is not easy. Is so much easier said than done. And the willingness to do that, I just have to sincerely hope that desire to take on the action and look within the organization and for them to talk to each other and be like, if they see someone else clowning, then they're like, you cannot do that. We actually have to tell each other when something is not going right so you can address it head on. And I don't think that's going to happen in every single organization that says that they want it to happen. You literally just have to hope the best on that. But,
Yep, indeed.
Yeah.
Well, based on the upcoming West Coast premiere of both, I wanted to wrap up with a sort of duality themed question. So today I've spent a good amount of time on the Bandcamp page of Good Looking Friends. I bought my own copy of The Light of the Well. So
thank you.
I'm your newest fan. Most people would think of Shelley Washington, the composer, and Shelley Washington, the member of this band, as two completely separate things. But you're one person. You're the same human being. Do you have aspirations of joining those two worlds? Is it possible for a crowd that comes to see your band to be the crowd that comes to see one of your compositions performed by an orchestra?
Oh, they do. Which is, I love that. It has been, since it was such a childhood dream of me, me to be in a band, that also meant like, am I cool enough to hang out with all these cool rock people in Brooklyn? And like, I, started showing up to shows. I'm like, I am not cool. And that is not true, because everyone is like super chill, and that community, they're my friends. And, if I invite them to shows, they're like, hell yeah, let's get to the gig. And it goes to the same, like, I go see their bands. Sometimes I get to play with them, and they're like, you have a classical music concert? What do I wear? I'm like, oh,
whatever you want. Yeah.
And I'm like, it does not matter. If you feel like getting fancy, you can. Or just roll up. It's fine. But actually, like, in my music, Zach and Sean and Adam are the other three members have had actually like a huge impact on what I write. So a lot of the ridiculous percussion stuff I write is Adam's fault. He's our drummer, Dr. Rock. And he's one of the most just gifted drummers I've ever heard. He's not like specifically trained or anything. He just loves it. He's a whole ass psychiatrist, the doctor, the good doctor, and the man shreds. So that sneaks its way into my music a lot. You will hear that in both. The last movement is, as described by one of my good friends, this is a percussion concerto. I'm like, no, it's not. Yeah, I kind of like what he is. For one movement only. But then, like, I have other music where there are things that they really inspired me in. Like, that is such a cool thing. I always like tell them, I'm like, I'm stealing from you. I'm not. Like, you guys have had a really big impact on the music I write. It's important to me. So I don't know if a lot of the classical community would want to come stand around for like 4 bands and it's dark and loud. I don't know. They're always welcome to. It's a good hang. Always lots of fun wearing earplugs. However, I love my little grubby punk friends who are also doctors. They come out, which is really, really cool.
That track's called No Thanks from the band Good Looking Friends. So in addition to being a composer of instrumental music, as the classical industry tends to think of it, Shelley Washington also writes and plays guitar for a band. So, again, that idea of
Yeah.
both we're talking about living in two different worlds, such an incredible person for me to meet. I'm spending more and more time in New York these days. Can't wait to go have a drink, knock a couple back with Shelley Washington and explore some of these things more. I want to jump back to the piece that we got into my conversation with the piece Say. You said you hadn't heard anything quite
Not
like
quite
that
like
before.
that. No, no. As a matter of fact, I can't think of many instrumentalists who are comfortable with their singing voice.
Mm-hmm.
So that was pretty cool to hear the members of the quartet actually vocalizing
Yeah.
and hocketing.
Yeah, yeah. One of the things that Shelley and I talked about was the distance between a person as a brand or as an idea and a person as a human being. So, Shelley talked about how a lot of people know the name Shelley Washington and know her through the music that she has created based on the venues and, the different things that go into someone knowing her as a composer versus the Shelley Washington that the folks in her band, Good Looking Friends know, or her family knows, or just other friends, the Shelley Washington that they know, and how there can be a distance between those things. I've thought about that for myself, Garrett McQueen as this sort of brand or this voice that people know versus the Garrett McQueen that you know.
Hmm.
And that Dell knows. It's even for me. I'm thinking about taking a non-professional name in 2023. I think I'm gonna do it, but
Wait a minute, wait.
this
What do you mean a non-professional name?
so a name, and I have it in mind. I'm not going to share it yet, but what I want people to call me and to refer to me as when they are interested in having a conversation with me and not booking me for something or asking me about TRILLOQUY or those things, because sometimes I struggle with Garrett McQueen, the human being, and Garrett McQueen, the brand, the voice, the agitator, those things. Have you had any thoughts or ideas about Scott Blankenship, the human being, and Scott Blankenship, the national radio host, the voice that people hear, the producer that people know? What are your ideas on that sort of duality?
It's interesting that you should bring that up because I struggle
Hmm.
with when people hear that I work in classical radio, they automatically get an idea. Just like when you say, I went to an orchestral concert this past weekend.
They're like,
But right.
oh, yeah,
But they would not have anticipated the clip that you played,
right,
would they?
right,
So I try to tell people that what you hear me do on the radio or on this podcast is like looking at what I do through a Viewmaster.
right.
You're getting a snapshot because there's a whole bunch of other stuff that make up who I am that you're never going to see.
Hmm. Hmm.
And you're never going to be hip to. And those are the most real parts.
Right, exactly.
Because that's a job. Being a national classical host is a job. It's not who I am. And up there, I'm trying to hit a time post
Yeah.
most of the time. So you're not going to hear all of my thoughts on anything, and certainly you're not going to hear my most personal. I even thought about using an on-air name
Yeah.
so that I could differentiate it, because I've got people who send me pictures of my house.
Yeah. Really.
They have gotten
Yikes.
to that. They know where I live. And one of the things that I tried to okay, let me go in the Wayback Machine here real quick. When I was teaching as an adjunct, when I was teaching radio as an adjunct, I told all of my students, look, people are going to decide whether they love you or they hate you from the moment they
Right.
hear
In the
your
first
voice.
30 seconds. Yep.
And the radical ones are going to try to find you on both ends, either because they're so love you so much,
Yeah.
and or the people who want to hurt you.
Yep.
And that's scary shit, man.
Mm-hmm.
That is
Mm-hmm.
inappropriate. That's all I'm going to say is that I have thought about, like you said, having that professional name, and there's times that I wish that I had.
I think it's too late. So when I started in radio, there were some program directors and especially folks in news at the first station I worked at that assumed that Garrett McQueen was my on-air name. They were like, more than once people will be like, "And I love the name you've chosen for yourself. That's very," and I'm like, "No, that's my name. That's who I am." I think I'm too deep and too public of a figure
Yeah.
to completely just wipe away Garrett McQueen. And let's face it, it's excellent casting. Me, who I am, and last name McQueen. I love it. And there are times where I wish that I could know. This sounds bad. There are times when I wish I could know what a person wants from me as soon as they start talking to me.
Mhm.
So I feel like taking on a name, if you're using the name Garrett McQueen, I'm going to assume that you are talking to the person who produces a podcast, produces radio programming, who works for the American Composers Orchestra, who is in the field of agitating classical music. I'm going to assume you're talking to that person. If you want to talk to the person who you want to buy some weed from, who you want to engage on a personal level, who you want to take to the wrestling match,
Mm.
this is who you need to talk to. So we'll see. I have the name picked out. I'm we'll see what happens at the beginning of 2023. But anyway, just wanted to bring that part of the conversation to you just to see what you thought, because that is something that Shelley and I definitely engaged even beyond the recording, talking about how we think about that. So yeah, feel free to reach out to me if you have experiences therein. Again, shout out and a special thank you to Shelley Washington for joining me this week on the TRILLOQUY podcast. All right. We're getting into the fourth movement, the TRILLOQUY movement, and we're going to listen to a work by James DeMars. It's called Premonitions of Christopher Columbus. I'll offer some context around this piece on the other side, but here's a little bit of the opening of it. That's R. Carlos Nakai playing the flute in that recording. I believe the orchestra. Let me see. Let me check in here on the program notes here. The orchestra isn't named in the program notes, but if I remember correctly, that's the Utah Symphony Orchestra. Anyway, this piece of music was one that I included in a Indigenous Peoples Day program that I did down at WUOT back in 2017. But the interesting thing is, people weren't using the phrase Indigenous Peoples Day back at that point. I'm gonna put myself out here a little bit, because radio hosts, we love to archive our scripts that we write for ourselves. So, sometimes I read some of my old scripts and I'm like, "Oh, Garrett, you were so fucking square." But let me let me read what I wrote for myself back in 2017 for this radio program. I said, "Good afternoon. Today is Monday, October 9th, and you're listening to the afternoon concert here on your classical station, 91.9 FM WOT. I'm Garrett McQueen. Thank you for joining me this afternoon. For today, I've put together a collection of pieces that honor America's indigenous people. Composer James DeMars has a large collection of music that falls into this category, so we'll hear three of his works today, as well as the music of Erica Wazen, Catherine Hoover, and many others." And I go on and talk about some things. I wanted to read that and bring this to the front because when I heard someone say Columbus Day this year, it struck me in a way that I wouldn't have expected. I have spent so much time not thinking about Christopher Columbus that someone saying Columbus Day just sounds weird to my ears. Again, back in 2017, people were still very much saying Columbus Day, but I chose, in my spirit and through my activism to not even go there.
Right.
I didn't say Indigenous Peoples Day in that script because that's not what people were doing, and I didn't have that in my vocabulary. So instead, I said, "All right, we're going to listen to music that is inspired by indigenous people." So on this program, that I maybe I'll put a link to this program listing in the description. But I have like as I mentioned, works by James DeMars, one called "Far from Water," premonitions of Christopher Columbus, and then he has a symphony. It's called the Two World Symphony. Definitely check that out if you haven't. There's Shadow Catcher by Erica Wazen on this playlist, Dream Catcher by composer Walter Mays, Canyon Echoes for flute and guitar by Catherine Hoover. I can go on, and we can have the conversation of white composers writing indigenous themed music and the nuances of that. But at the end of the day, it was in my spirit to just make the effort to do something different and to honor the marginalized people on this day that people call Columbus Day. Do you have, but before we get into the specifics of, that conversation, how have you engaged or have you engaged programming that aligns with indigenous people and indigenous culture in the past, especially considering that you're from Omaha, Nebraska, which is in itself an indigenous word, at least it sounds like one. I imagine
Mhm.
there's some history there when it comes to the way people engage local culture. Has this been a conversation that you've thought about for many years in a row?
Back in the day when I was actually programming my own show, um, it was even further away from calling it Indigenous
Exactly.
Peoples
Yeah.
Day. So, no, there was none of that. And back then, I didn't even have the knowledge of those composers to
Hmm.
highlight them. So it's been my own process and my own learning over the years that has got me to where I am right now. But no, back when I was actually programming my own show, I didn't have that connection.
Yeah.
Um, but you're right. Omaha is indigenous.
And
So,
and I didn't have that connection either, I'm
yeah.
because I'm a black man, so, there's not a whole bunch of just, ancestral or cultural knowledge I have about, at least at that point, about indigenous people. But I did the legwork of finding everything I could, and I'm sure it took me a long time to put together that playlist because it's one thing to go into, your music cataloging software and type it in the word indigenous, but indigenous isn't the title of any of these pieces of music. So there's some actual legwork that one has to do, that I had to do to create that programming. So that's the first point that I want to make, is that as we shift away from Columbus Day and into Indigenous Peoples Day, it's not going to be easy work for artistic programmers and conductors and music directors to find programming that fits into honoring indigenous people. It's not easy work. The work is doing your research, doing your reading, engaging different conversations, listening to different podcasts, whatever you have to do to know who some of these composers are and to know where you can find some of these recordings and some of these pieces of music. That's number one.
Mm.
Number two, though, is that I got online, I woke up this morning just to see what the internet was talking about on this Indigenous Peoples Day. And of course, Twitter never fails to tell the story. You have threads upon threads upon threads of people who are just riding for Columbus Day, saying that it honors, the contributions of Italian Americans in this country and da 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 and blah blah blah. From your perspective, I wonder what that is a symptom of. If I just go on the internet and call these people racist, they don't hear me, and all of a sudden I'm the bad guy, and I'm being divisive and X, Y, and Z. Okay.
Of course.
So what is all of that a symptom of? Is it really rooted in Italian American pride, or what? What from your perspective, what could it be?
It's a sanitized version of history that we've been taught since we were in grade school.
Mm.
And now you're seeing the cognitive dissonance of people who don't quite grasp why you're attacking things that they learned in first grade.
Hmm.
But I want to shout out my fifth grade teacher. Shout out to the late Mrs. Crowder, who I remember I came in from, I don't know, I had been called to the office for something. When I came back, she says, do you know who, we were just talking about the discovery of America, Scott. Do you know who discovered America? And I went, yeah, Christopher Columbus. And she went, no, 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 no. It was Leif Erikson. And she launches into this whole thing about how Leif Erikson, the Viking, had been here hundreds
Ooh.
of
And
years
see, and now we
before.
here in Minnesota, and they'll cuss you out for trying to take Leif Erikson out of the conversation.
Right. So, she was planting the seeds back then.
Yeah.
But, here what you're challenging things that people who peaked
Ooh, come on.
in these
Come on.
in high school and junior high, you're challenging what they believe to be true.
And even with the Leif Erikson, shout out to my uncle is named, we call him Leif. We don't say Leif. Leif Erikson
right.
Dyer is his name.
Right.
So I have that name even in my immediate family, my mom's brother. Shout out to Uncle Eric. But even that is incorrect to say that Leif Erikson discovered America. That is just so fucked up to teach that to children.
You mean when people are here?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
and have been forever. So what
Right.
the fuck you talking about discovering something? Shout out to me and Dell's friends, Kevin and Jess. They have two little ones, and we were talking about education and that sort of thing. We hung out with them a little bit yesterday. If I had kids, I would just be so apprehensive to send them to some of these schools, because I feel like I would have to be in the classroom every other day yelling at the teacher. Well, maybe not yelling, having a conversation with the teacher about, why are you telling my child that someone named Christopher Columbus or Leif Erikson or whoever discovered America? Why aren't you telling my child the truth about the history of this country? So, when that comes to the education systems, that bleeds into the way that we think about our American infrastructures, the way that we think about the so-called foundations of this country, and just wipe all of this away. I think we're still in a point where we think about Indigenous people as one and forget about the fact that you had so
Yeah.
many different traditions, especially even musical traditions.
Yeah.
You have Indigenous traditions that center around the drum. You have Indigenous traditions that center around different sorts of flutes and things. I believe when Jarrett Tate was on the podcast, he talked about how the musical traditions that he comes from are a lot about the shaker, so tortoise shells and things, making music along those lines. But we're still thinking of Indigenous people as one, and number two, gone. Not non-existent anymore when they still exist. I think there are just so many conversations that we need to have about Indigenous equity and what it means for us to honor them properly. But we can't even do that because people are still making a reason justifying the idea of a Columbus Day. That's ridiculous. We haven't played the sound clip in a long time from the movie Pocahontas.
These white men are dangerous.
Yeah.
But think about, that being in a Disney film, that little morsel of truth, being taught to children. But of course, I'm sure it was somebody complaining about that
Of course
back in
there
the day
was.
in 1994, whenever
Of
Pocahontas
course.
came out. I love that, at least in Pocahontas Part 1, because, Disney loves to do Part 2 and 3 where they flipping the script. But at the end of the movie Pocahontas, John Smith gets hurt, and goes back to England. And Pocahontas is like, all right, well, see you. You know, she don't get on the boat with him. You
Right.
know, she gives him the long goodbye and says, I hope they fix you over there, and I hope that you understand what happened over here. Anyway, I get worked up about it because the degree to which we have to be re-educated, respond to our miseducation just seems so deep, especially on days like Indigenous Peoples Day. It's hard for me to not feel that frustration, but I think it's also important for us to make sure that we're thinking about ways to honor Indigenous people, especially in our musical presentations and everything else we do. This podcast is called Triloquy, so I wanted to wrap up with one idea, basically one question. Scott, how do you think we need to think about the idea of repatriation? Black folks always talk about liberation. In a lot of indigenous circles, we're talking about repatriation, giving land back to indigenous people. What does that mean for the business owner? What does that mean for the homeowner? What are your
Mhm.
ideas around repatriation?
Yeah, I don't even have one. It's
Mm,
it's really difficult for me to wrap my head around it. I get that it is stolen land. I get
mhm,
I get this. And I also have the point of view of like, well, I did purchase this in the sphere that I am in now.
mhm,
I bought a home and I've been maintaining it,
yep,
but this isn't on my land. There's loads of things that I've seen online today, and um, one of the quotes that really resonated with me was this guy talking about how you need to be able to differentiate. No, you did not create a genocide or commit a genocide, but as a white person, you have benefited from it,
yeah.
from that source. So I'm still trying to fully come to grips with that. As far as what land back would look like, how it would impact me, I'm not sure. What do you
Yeah.
think about when you
I
think of
have a
it?
lot of dissonances as well because I come to the conversation of, well, look, my ancestors were brought here unwillingly. Were not among those colonizer class people. So the way that I engage it is even different. I think a lot about the state of Hawaii and how indigenous people there, native Hawaiians, are like, do not come over here. This
Yeah,
is this is not your vacation spot.
yeah,
And there's a part of me that's like, of course, I'll never buy a plane ticket to Hawaii. There's another part of me that's like, but are you talking to me? Should you be talking to me? It's the conversations are not easy to have. I've made a point to seek out more indigenous people, not to create content around or to do that, but to just really dialogue with and to have some of these conversations. Dell and I have made reservations to go eat at Awamni. The reservations are in December because you're not just gonna walk up
right,
in there.
right. They don't have bar seating.
No, you have to get on the list, and
Yeah,
so we got on the list, so we'll be there in December. But I just hope everyone can just figure out a way to honor the history of indigenous people in the most authentic way you can. We're here in the field of music, so-called classical music. So, I'm always thinking about those composers. Shout out to Brent Michael Davids, who taught me the concept of musicking, and indigenous music, not as this thing, but something that is always tied to ceremony or an event. Shout out to Raven Chacon, the first indigenous artist to win the Pulitzer here, just this year, member of the Triloquy family. Jared Impecha Cha Tate, who's been on Triloquy, who I've learned so much from, James DeMars, Arkalos Nakai. There are so many indigenous composers, music creators, and folks who that we can engage to just get better at these conversations and to honor indigenous people better than we have. Triloquy is recorded and produced on the ancestral and contemporary lands of the Wapakudi Sioux, who are a part of the broader Eastern Dakota group of tribes. I always think about in my presentations how I can honor them and not just do the land acknowledgement to do it, but to put people on to some knowledge or to some music or something that is connected with indigenous culture. We have a lot to do. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day to everyone who's talking about Columbus Day. get your life together and
Mhm.
think about what repatriation would mean for you. We have these so-called political conservatives who are so afraid of Mexicans crossing the border and taking their land, but that's what your ancestors did. You see, people
Yeah.
get so close
Yep.
to understanding what the issue is. It's right there in their fucking face, but they're too close to see it. Anyway, positivity. Thank you for listening, everybody. Happy Indigenous Peoples Day. We'll see you next week.